The relationship is rather, both are very much interrelated concepts. Access to justice is the vehicle for legal empowerment of the poor, and legal empowerment of the poor is premised on fundamental human rights, which is also the equality before law. So when we talk about access to justice, we talk about access to justice for the poor, then it is almost legal empowerment of the poor. So, operationally, the distinction is not there. So, but we, as UNDP is operationalizing a legal empowerment, we have three very specific focus areas: property rights, labor rights, and right to do business, which is right to self-employment as well. And we use access to justice and rule of law as the underpinning framework for those rights, enforcement and enjoyment of those rights. So it is a means to an end in that sense, but also legal empowerment is an end in itself because it is a fundamental human rights issue. So I would say access to justice provides that means, but legal empowerment of the poor in some ways also an affirmative action for the poor, because it's not just about equality before law, but poor people need some extra support, an extra access, and in terms of enjoyment of their rights, fundamental rights, including property, business, and labor rights. So in that sense, legal empowerment goes beyond equality before law and also reinforces the concept of affirmative action for the poor. The whole objective of legal empowerment is to address the concerns or facilitate the enjoyment of the rights of the poor in the domains of property, business, and labor rights. And the key sort of intermediate variable for us is that we address the issues of exclusion quite effectively, and exclusion meaning the people who are marginalized, who don't have access to basic services, basic resources, basic legal aid. So the whole agenda is targeted towards making sure that those who are excluded are included in the processes. And we want to provide a very clear sort of framework for that kind of facilitation. And the reason we address the issues of property and business and labor rights is not that we are seeing this rise in isolation from other fundamental rights, but we believe a strategic focus on these rights can facilitate poverty eradication. It can be a necessary condition for poverty eradication, but we're not saying this is a sufficient condition. So obviously it would require legal empowerment, and interventions would require working with other interventions, including interventions in areas of public administration reform, in the areas of justice sector reform, which is the court system and other state machinery. But we believe focusing on certain rights can have a very strong impact on poverty and by extension on exclusion and marginalization. The poor, those who are employed, lucky to be employed, would probably face severe pressure on their employment status, meaning that they might be pushed into unemployment. Many of the poor who have very limited asset might lose erosion of their assets. Some of them, if they have bank accounts or small savings, they might see erosion of their entire savings because of either currency depreciation or because of banks being bankrupt or because of other pressures. So this crisis actually, although there are different schools of thoughts about how the crisis would actually impact the poor, but there's a general agreement that the biggest impact would come through unemployment. And economists and policymakers generally agree on that manifestation of this crisis. And you can already see unemployment is on the rise across the board, but more so in countries that are worst affected by the crisis, including countries in the Balkan and Eastern Europe. And the legal empowerment would require, that means, as poor people move into become unemployed, they would demand more social protection, legal protection, and sometimes legal services to claim unemployment benefits, to claim pension benefits, and legal empowerment can provide a framework so that their rights are duly protected through legal aid services, legal clinic services, or paralegal programs. So that could be one area. The other area of concern is the area of the losing your access to property and property rights, especially the housing rights. Many of these poor people or marginally poor people would face foreclosure and eviction and bankruptcy. And often, a better legal system or a framework can protect them against bankruptcy, personal bankruptcy. And I think UNDP and in general, in partnership with national government and other stakeholders, can provide better protection against foreclosures, eviction, and other kind of erosion of property rights. We should not have any assumption or presumption that legal empowerment of the poor is the template that we can take to a different country and just say you just follow the template. I think it will be very nuanced and very contextual. So one has to be very careful about how you fit the legal empowerment framework into a particular local context. So that would mean for legal empowerment initiatives or interventions to succeed, we have to do a lot of homework. Homework with country partners, in-country stakeholders, including CSOs and NGOs, who can represent the interests and concerns of the poor. And one thing that I want to emphasize, the process of empowerment begins with legal identity and voice. And so often we can start at a very small scale intervention where we can try to give legal identity to certain disadvantaged or marginalized people so that they can voice their demand. They can demand certain services, certain legal protection and social protection as citizens. So, but legal identity can be an issue in many sub-Saharan African countries, many South Asian countries, or countries in the Asia-Pacific, but will not be an issue here in the Balkans or in Eastern Europe, where legal identity is not an issue. So this is an example that you cannot have one-size-fits-all approach in legal empowerment. But some of the basic messages of legal empowerment would hold true across contexts. And these are the issues that how we address the issues of property rights. The variation would be on the how side, not what. Empowerment would require a strong focus on certain livelihood rights, and we should not compromise those rights. But how we achieve those rights and enforce those rights will vary from country to country, and that will be determined by national context, level of national interest, level of national commitment and leadership, and also the resources available to make that transformation.